Welcome everybody. The title of our webinar today is Top Delivery Struggles That Speakers Face and How to Combat Them. Jeff and I are going to talk through some of the top problems and challenges that we encounter when we're coaching speakers, and some stories and some tips about how to work through them. That's all you're going to see of slides for most of our webinar. For the rest of it, it's going to be just Jeff and I. And you should see just Jeff and I on your screen. So this is going to be a conversation. If you have questions, we would like you to specifically put your questions in the Q&A box. So click Q&A on your screen. It'll give you an opportunity to enter a question there. If you have questions related to the webinar itself, or you're having some tech issues or anything like that, put those in the chat window, which is where Emily and Alexa, our production team, will be monitoring, and they'll answer your questions there. But if you want Jeff and I to speak to a question, please put it in the Q&A. And we may answer some of those as we go, otherwise we'll save them to the end. Jeff and I talked before this, and we listed out the top 5 challenges that we see the most. So we're going to start with those. We're going to go through that as a bit of an agenda, and then we'll segue to question asking. So with that, Jeff, happy Wednesday. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day, and it's a good day to talk about how people talk.
That's right. I'm looking forward to this. We always have a great time on these. So the first challenge.
Wait a minute. Who the heck are you?
I'm Doug Neff. I work at Duarte. I've been at Duarte for many years, and for most of that time, I was a content developer and speaker coach alongside Jeff. You want to introduce yourself, Jeff?
Sure. I'm Doug. Oh, dang. I'm Jeff Davenport. I've been working for Duarte for about 7 years now as a content developer at one point, but then primarily as a speaker coach, and also as someone who helps create some of the workshops that Duarte offers to help people like you get better at communication in your business and in whatever it is you have going. And Doug and I love to talk about delivery. That seems to be something that we love talking about. Space. We love talking about Star Wars, and we love talking about delivery and how to help anyone get better at communicating their ideas in a way that just grabs people. Everybody can get better at this. I keep saying this about a number of things, but delivery is a skill. It's not something that some people are born good at, and some people, well, they're just not born at. Everybody can grow in this. And so our hope in our time today that you get just enough to go, I think I can actually start to deliver better when I'm communicating in front of a group of people, in front of even just one person, whether it's in your personal life or in your work life.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jeff. The first challenge that we talked about in our conversation earlier was overcoming nervousness. And I want to frame this a little bit, set it up a little, because nervousness has many words and takes many forms for speakers. Stage fright is nervousness, anxiety is nervousness, just the general fear of public speaking, glossophobia, that's nervousness. Nervousness also just shows up as discomfort, uncomfortable, someone who seems tight, distracted by things. All of that can come out of this word nervousness. And Jeff, I know you particularly have been really interested in the physiology of this aspect of speaking. And so I wonder if you could set that up a little bit. What's going on in our bodies when we're nervous, when we're fighting that stuff back and trying to speak to an audience?
Well, I think when we think of being nervous or having any sort of stage fright, it's easy to think of it in binary terms. Either I'm someone who gets debilitating stage fright, or no, I guess I'm okay, but that's not really the case. Most of us have we're on some sort of end of a spectrum. And the way I think about it, if you want to think, gosh, do I get nervous when I speak? Think about how you talk to your spouse, your best friend, your kid, when you're just hanging out doing, talking about nonsense. And then think about how you feel when you have to communicate in a business situation that has any sort of pressure on it whatsoever. If there's a difference there, then there's some sort of nervousness that's kicking in. And so here's what's happening in your body when you got to give a talk. You're talking to 1,000 people, you're talking to 10 people, you're talking to your boss, whatever it might be. When you start to communicate, your sympathetic nervous system kicks in. And this is that fight, flight, or freeze response. It goes into action. And what your body does, your body responds to talking to these people as if it was facing some sort of physical danger. And when your body goes, oh, this is an actual danger, it picks up on that danger, your adrenaline gland kicks in, releasing adrenaline and cortisol into your bloodstream. Now, all of this is designed to give your body like a boost so that you feel something and you've got energy to, if it was let's say it was a mountain lion, that you could run away from that mountain lion. But the problem is that when you're talking to a group of people or your boss, you don't need to have all of that energy. So your body doesn't know what to do with that energy. And it comes out in all sorts of crazy ways. Your legs or hands shake, you sweat, your blood pressure goes up. Your digestion shuts down because your body's going, look, we don't need to digest the profiteroles we have this morning. We just need to focus on what's right in front of us. And so it shuts down that digestion. And that's what results in the dry mouth and the butterflies you get in your stomach. Your vocal cords start to spasm and you get that shaky voice. Your muscles tense up, your pupils dilate, all sorts of crazy things happen. And the reason that's happening, and I always think it's important to understand, why is my body responding this way? Because again, you're not looking, I'm not, there's 185 of y'all. I'm feeling a little bit nervous right now. Well, none of y'all are going to hop in a car or a plane and drive over to my house and, sock me in the head because you don't like what I've said. But there is a danger to Doug and I doing this. And the danger is a social danger. Our reputations are at stake, whether we know you or not. We want you to think well of us. And the reason all of us, all of our participants, every one of us feels nervous when we communicate to a group of people or someone who's really important is because our reputation is on the line and we're social animals. And so we respond in our body the same way we would respond. We respond in our bodies to a social danger the same way we respond to a physical danger. So that's kind of why all of this stuff is going on inside of us. And it really has to do with how do we think of ourselves and how do we think of ourselves in relation to someone else. So a number of years ago, I was working with a client at a big giant retailer, and she was the new head of HR. And she was going to be talking to, I think it was an in-person group of like 10,000 people. It was one of these big giant events. And she was fantastic. I was coaching her. She's delivering well. She's dynamic. She's interesting. She tells great stories. Loved working with her. And so at the end of our time, I said to her, I can't remember her name. We'll say it was Teresa. I said, Teresa, how are you feeling? Feeling good? Feeling excited? She kind of shook her head and she went, well, I guess I just hope I don't die out there. And I was really taken aback because she had been so confident and she was so good at all of this. And suddenly she's telling me that, I could possibly make a fool of myself in front of all of these people. She had what we call the wrong approach mindset. And her regard for the audience and how she was concerned about how they saw her started to undercut all of the confidence that she naturally would have had.
Yeah. And then that's so common, isn't it? That you then show up on that stage worse than you actually are because right. you let that fear get in front of you. That's always hard to watch. And certainly one of the things we try to help the most with as a coach, if we can get you comfortable as you are just talking to me when you're on stage, then that's usually a huge step improvement for a speaker. I remember one of the things I've seen that drags people down in terms of anxiousness or nervousness is, we tend to see folks that are either memorizers or improvisers. I've only seen those two. I haven't seen anyone who's not one of those two, that people prefer to memorize what they're going to say, and people who prefer not to, who prefer to riff and improvise on what they're going to say. And the challenge is that neither side usually does enough work to get to where they need to go. I remember in particular a class we used to teach at Duarte. It ended up growing into what is now the Captivate workshop. But just internally, we taught a speaking class to our designers, our design team, who need to pitch their work to clients. And we got some requests from the designers that they were finding that difficult and wanted to get better at it. And I remember this one designer, extremely creative. His work was incredible to look at. All he had to do is put it in front of you. But with clients, you have to pitch it. You have to bring it alive for them. And he had prepared this pitch that went off on a Lord of the Rings metaphor, and he crafted everything. He was a great writer. He wrote this beautiful pitch, and he stood up to deliver it and pitch his work to us. We were in person back then. And he said his first couple of lines and then he forgot what his next line was. And this, Jeff, this took him down so hard, he couldn't utter a word. He couldn't find a single word to say because he had lost the thread of what he had memorized. So memorizers, in order to be comfortable and not as nervous on stage, need to go way past just learning the material. They need to memorize so deeply that it's like knowing your ABCs or happy birthday. It needs to be that embodied in you. And on the other side of the coin, the improvisers that we see often don't do enough work either. They have a couple things in mind and, I'm just going to wing it. I'm just going to go out there and wing it. And they will often hit on a topic and then feel pulled in a certain direction and go down a rat hole for 10 minutes and completely lose the audience and the thread of what they're trying to say. And improvisers need to go way past just writing down a few notes. They need to plan out, just like in jazz music, you got to at least have your chords planned out. You can play lots of different notes within those chords, but you have to have the chord progression so that we can get to the end of the song, So one of the things I've seen is that folks are on, no matter which one you are, that's fine. That can be great. You can be great as a speaker, memorizing or improvising, but you've got to do the work to get you to that comfortable place.
That's right. And yeah, there's a great blog. There's a guy named Wait, or his blog is called Wait But Why. And there's an excellent write-up. And we're going to drop that in the chat here in a moment. There's a link to it. It's a long write-up and it's very funny. He's a very funny guy. But he's talking about, he was invited to give a TED talk, an actual official TED talk. And he talks about his preparation for it. And he talks about this very same spectrum. And he says there's kind of 3 ways of thinking about memorization levels or how you're going to approach something. And he says the first is winging it. You're the kind of person who goes, I'll be fine, I'll get it. And you obviously can't do that for TED, but a regular talk. Well, what's the topic? Okay, I'll be fine. I'm going to wing it. The second is talking through a set structure, meaning that there is certain key points you're going to hit along the way, and those provide poles that you can go between to get from point to point. And then on the far end is that memorization. That's following an exact script. And he talks about, if you're a memorizer, the dangers inherent in being a memorizer, because unless you know it, Doug mentioned Happy Birthday, unless you know it as well as you know the song Happy Birthday, you've got a lot of danger there, because just like this guy Doug's talking about, when you start to lose it and you're like, oh, I forgot what I was going to say, it can undercut everything. This is connected to nervousness, because the way I see it, the more nervous you are, if you add on to that memorization, if you just mess it up a little, everything is going to collapse. Everything is going to collapse. So our tip is, where are you at? Oh, 2 tips. I'll say this, 2 tips about nervousness. Number 1, who are you? Like, how do you know who you are? How do you know that you're the right person to communicate to this audience? As you start to recognize those things, some of that nervousness, not all of it, but some of that nervousness will come down. And second, are you a memorizer? Are you an improviser? What's the right mode for you to go into, judging how you normally feel in terms of nervousness?
I remember one speaker that we both worked with, Jeff. I'm not going to say his name, but we had asked him before he came to the office to practice his speech. And we said at least 5 times, practice reading through it at least 5 times, do it out loud, not just reading to yourself. That's another tip. Do it out loud. And he came and he had one of those moleskin notebooks that are gridded. And he said, well, every time I read through the entire speech out loud, I filled in 1 box. And he had a row of boxes. 10 or 15 times he had read through the entire speech. He was a memorizer and he wanted to know it really well. And that's the kind of work we're talking about. Just memorizing it. One of our creative directors, Duarte, says memorizing it means you're halfway. You have to memorize it and then keep going and keep going and keep going. So
that's right.
Great tip. Okay, our next topic area has to do with these. What do I do with my hands when I'm speaking?
Wash them. That's what I've been told. You got to wash them often.
Yep. Wash them at least 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So to frame this question, there are basically 3 things you can do with your hands in front of an audience. You can do nothing with them, keep them still. And if we're on camera, you don't know where my hands are. They're down here somewhere, but they're still. You can also move your hands without any kind of purpose. And if you have people in your life that talk with their hands, this is what we're talking about. So as they talk, they're just gesticulating, moving their hands around. It doesn't really have any meaning, but they're more active that way. And the third way is to move your hands with purpose, with intention. As I'm speaking about a number, I might put it up. I might draw a line as I talk about a platform or something like that. There are many ways you can make motions and pictures with your hands and that add to what you're saying. So those three things are always at play. You can always be doing one of those three things. And what we try to do is help people find a balance. We don't want you to, 3 weeks ago, I had 2 ice cream cones and I gained 5 pounds. And then last week I had, we don't want you to be a mime. It's not like that. We want you to have a balance. And when it helps to visualize something you're saying with your hands, then we want you to be able to do that.
I was working with someone a few years ago at a big conference, and it was one of these conferences they have literally hundreds of breakouts. And so this wasn't a big executive. This was a garden variety ham and egger engineer person. And I'm just going to be honest, his content was boring. And I didn't understand half of it because it was a WAN, LAN, some sort of internet connectivity stuff. And even his audience who was invested in it, who wanted to hear how you connect the WAN to the LAN, they were going to be interested. And yet this guy was not very interesting. The way he communicated was just not making these concepts stick. And so what I said to him, he was moving his hands in a nonsense way. He just move them back and forth, how most people do if they're not thinking about their hands. Yeah, a little puppet show, little very lame puppet show. And so I said to him what I say to almost all clients when it comes to their hands: look, your hands want something to do. I'm going to give them something to do. And so as he's talking through the WAN LAN connections, he's got a slide up that shows it. I said to him, I can't remember his name, but I said to him, I said, I want you to use your hands to show me this process. And he thought about it. And as an engineer, getting some really specific direction on something mattered to him. And so he went away and practiced and practiced and practiced. I didn't see him for a couple of months. And we came back, and it was the day before the big conference. I said, all right, let's run it. And I thought, oh man, this isn't going to go well. And I watched this guy take off, and he used his hands to show the WAN is here. And by the way, if you're in the WAN LAN business, I'm going to mess this up. The WAN is here. The LAN is here. You've got to have a central connectivity here. And when this goes over here, this has to come here. And if you don't have this piece here, none of this is going to work. And not only did he bring all of that to life and show the audience what he was saying, the more he moved his hands, the more his voice kicked in, the more dynamism came out. I've told this story a number of times when I teach Captivate. I was a cheeky middle school kid, and back in the day, we didn't have cell phones or video phones. And my mom would be on the phone with a big cord talking to her friends, and she would be moving her hands a lot. And when she'd hang up, I look at my mom and go, Mom, why are you moving your hands? The person you're talking to can't see. Well, my mom didn't know this, I'm sure, but actually the more you move your hands, the more your voice reflects it. So my mom's voice would get more dynamic when she moved her hands more. So 2 things there: move your hands to show what you're saying, but also move your hands and it will be reflected in the dynamism of your voice.
It's awesome. And I just registered the domain, the WAN LAN company.
That's right.
So I'm
sure.
Gonna start a new business now.
Well, I got the .net, so I'm.
That's great. And I see that all the time with my clients too, giving their hands something to do, especially when it's emphasis, changes their voice too. So I saw someone ask earlier about voiceover work. That's in our Q&A panel. We don't specifically teach voiceover for, like professional commercial reading. But I know from taking some classes in that area that voiceover artists do this. You can't see them. People that record the Pixar movies or commercials, you'll never see them. And yet they're using their hands while they talk to emphasize things because it brings their voice alive more. So you can take that on as a lesson. The pros do it when they're doing voiceover work. They stand up, they make movements with their hands while they're talking. It makes their voice more dynamic. And by the way, I do happen to know of a school, if you're interested in help specifically with voiceover work, Voice One in San Francisco, voice, then one.com. in San Francisco is a great school. They have a lot to teach, specifically in that voiceover field. The ideas that we're sharing with you today are about speaking in front of an audience, whether a virtual audience or an in-person audience, whether you're using visuals or not. Sometimes we're presenting with slides, sometimes we're not. Having said that about voice, let's slide into talking about specifically voice. Or actually, let's stay with that for a minute before we get into voice, because I want to leave them with a tip about hands. If you think that you don't have a good balance between what you're doing with your hands, what can you do to get better at that?
Most people don't know. They don't know what they do with their hands. They think, I think I move them, or I'm not really sure. I think I'm uncomfortable. Most people don't know. So, well, we're in the age of video. So watch a recorded video of yourself giving a presentation. The next time you do a Zoom presentation or whatever it might be, watch a video of yourself and just take notes. One thing you can do is turn the sound off and just take notes. Gosh, when do I actually move my hands? Is it when I do this? Is it when I do this? Do they have any purpose? Another thing you can do is turn the sound down low. Don't turn it all the way off, but turn it down low. And as you listen, your ears are going to try to strain to hear what you're actually saying, and watch yourself. Do the hand movements help your ears better understand what you're saying? If they do, that means that they are in line with what you're saying and you're actually using them to show what you're saying. And the last thing is, watch that video and put it on 2x speed and watch. And because it's going so fast, those pronounced things that you do a lot will become more obvious. You'll see them. We do this with clients, especially when we watch a client on a stage and we watch a video of them. When we put it on fast, we watch them go back and forth. Like, oh, well, they pace too much. Those repeated motions are going to become more obvious the faster you watch a video. So watch a video, take notes on yourself. Don't beat yourself up about it, but notice what's one thing you could do better with your hands that's going to help your hands speak in alignment with the words that you're saying.
Excellent. Yeah, it's those unconscious repetitive movements that we want to try to clean up. Anything you're doing on stage that's unconscious makes you look unconscious, for one thing, but it can also add to that look of nervousness. Looks like if you're pacing back and forth, and the video will show that, that's what a nervous person would do. So your audience is thinking, he's not very confident in what he's saying. He's not feeling very comfortable up there, and we never want that. So now let's shift into voice. And I wonder, Jeff, if you can frame how we talk about dynamic vocals with someone. We get a lot of folks that think one way about vocal dynamics, and we try to level that a little bit, that it's not usually how people think of it. Can you frame that for us?
Yeah, a lot of people they'll say, well, I'm not a dynamic speaker, or, oh, I wish I was like that dynamic speaker. And a lot of times when they say dynamism, what they mean is people with high energy. Oh, they're coming on the stage and they got a lot of energy. That's energy. That's not necessarily dynamism. Dynamism is all about choosing intentional moments when you make your content through your voice pop. So if there was a waveform, high energy people, they stay up here on the waveform and, oh man, it's awesome. That's not always what an audience needs to hear. Matter of fact, more often than not, they don't. What they need on a waveform is ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. If it's all up here, they're going to get some fun energy for a while. But then honestly, audiences get exhausted with the high energy because they don't know what's most important. When everything is high energy, everything's important, and our brains as listeners can't parse through what actually is the most important thing they're saying. So we train people when it comes to dynamism, have a nice, good, not super low Eeyore level of energy, but have a good level of energy, and then make it pop at certain moments. When you want to emphasize a word, a phrase, an idea, a story, a key statistic. And you can do that by altering your pace. You're talking at a normal pace, and then you suddenly slow down, or getting louder on something. Even changing your pitch, going up sometimes can emphasize something, or pausing right before you say something and pausing right after. So I might say, look, the difference between high energy and actual dynamism is what you select to underline. Just changing something like that makes it pop out to the audience. And great dynamic speakers, again, they're not just high energy people. Their brains are constantly thinking about what they're saying and saying, how can I make the most important thing stand out?
Absolutely. It's like if you have someone in your life who, when they send emails, they do everything in bold, or they do everything in all caps.
Kanye tweet.
Then you start reading that and eventually you get used to it. And even though it's all caps or it's all emphasized, then none of it's emphasized. You stop being able to realize what's important to them. Whereas someone who puts one phrase in bold and highlights it, you know that one phrase is more important than anything. The same is true for your voice. We're trying to make it easier for the audience to understand exactly what's important. And we do that, we don't have a highlighter, we don't have bold, we don't have italics. So we do that by changing our voice. We do that by getting louder or softer, faster or slower. And we do it by adding in pauses. And that's it. That's the whole secret to being a dynamic vocal speaker, is to vary it, to mix it up, to add contrast. We always say to people, there are fast speakers and slow speakers, and we have very little luck in changing people from one to the other, because we speak that way all the time. And so to change that habit is very difficult, but we can teach either of those groups how to use speed as an emphasis. If you're a fast talker, then when you slow down, people are going to listen. They're going to lean in and wonder what you're saying that's so important that you're going to slow down. And if you're a slow, measured talker, not like Eeyore, but if you're generally a slower talker, if you start to get fast and really hammer some points home, people are going to, wow, that must be important. They're speeding up, they're changing. So it's that change is what's important.
There's a consistency between what we talked about with hands and what we talked about with voice. And the way I think of it is this: imagine every audience member you're communicating to you saying this to you: will you please make it as easy as possible for me to know what's most important? Will you make it as easy as possible for me to know what's most important? Using your hands can do that, and using vocal dynamism can do that as well.
Absolutely. It's kind, it's generous, it's thoughtful.
Empathetic.
It's what we would call empathetic. You know,
Yeah.
you're putting your audience's needs above your own. So let's talk about how you get better at this. One thing that I've done with clients is if you have a recording, or even better, a transcript of what they said, I'll print it out and I'll put it in front of them, and I'll say, please point to me which are the most important words in that sentence. Which words do you think you emphasize? Let's watch the recording again. And the answer will always come back, well, I guess I didn't emphasize any of them. Great. So how am I in your audience supposed to know what's important? And so I'll have them take a highlighter or underline and emphasize the words on that script, and then do it again and do the emphasized words differently, or add a hand motion to those emphasized words. But record yourself, transcribe yourself, map it out, and then do it again. And that exercise seems to have a big effect. What you want to be able to do is every paragraph worth of words that you're speaking should have emphasis in it somewhere. Otherwise, you probably don't need to be saying that particular sentence or paragraph, but there should be something worth taking away in every paragraph. You could think of it as every slide if you're delivering slides. Something in the speaker notes for that slide is worth emphasizing. Decide ahead of time what it is, and then use all the tools you have, whether it's your voice or your hands, or if you're in person, your feet to move around on the stage, to use that to emphasize.
There's a question in the chat, and I'm not going to answer the question fully, but I do want to connect that question to this very thing. And anonymous attendee, which God help your parents for naming you that. Anonymous attendee said, what's the best way to read a script from on your screen? And I think you're talking about the practicalities of that, and we will talk about that in the Q&A. But I do want to connect that to this and say, if you've got some sort of script, do what Doug's saying and go through and find the words that, if you're going to be reading the script to your audience, highlight or bold or whatever it is, the words you need to punch. Again, that's what great audiobook readers do, is they don't just read the text. They highlight the words that they want to punch with their voice. Plan ahead what you want to punch. Only then will you punch it in the moment. We'll keep that question up there because we want to answer that more thoroughly a little bit later.
Absolutely. I was a musician in college playing in wind ensembles, and you do this with your sheet music. The composer wrote the piece the way it is, and we're not going to change any of the notes, but every conductor has their own style and the way that they want the the wind ensemble to play that music. So you take out a pencil and you mark it up. This forte is going to be a bit louder. We're going to go a little bit faster here, really emphasize this crescendo, and you write it in your music so that when you're playing it, you get to those points and you remember to do that emphasis. Same thing is true for speakers. I love that. Okay, next topic, Jeff, is connecting sentences and ideas throughout a speech or a presentation. You want to set that up for us?
Sure. Great communicators are great writers. Now, if you're not a great writer, don't worry about it. What I mean by that is that great communicators, great verbal communicators, are actually writing in their minds while they're speaking. Their sentences aren't all over the place. Now, that doesn't mean that if you were to take a transcript, it would read exactly like an authored book. It's not that. But it means that they're carefully thinking about how they're constructing their ideas, and they're communicating in sentences, in paragraphs, in sections. As they communicate, they're speaking their punctuation. Now, that doesn't mean you're doing the Victor Borge thing, well, kind of period. Look him up, young kids. He was hilarious. But it means that you're actually pausing where you would have written a comma. Or at the end of a sentence, you put a little pause there. When you're transitioning ideas, you also put a pause there. Great speakers are great communicators are great writers. They're just doing it in their head. And one part of that is, how does a great writer connect ideas? Great writers don't connect ideas by taking one idea, one sentence, and just butting it up against another. There's actual connective tissue. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what is that connective tissue between sentences, and really more, probably more applicable, is between ideas or between slides.
Yeah, I think about it as between your slides, there needs to be something that connects them. In fact, I like there to be, by the time you get finished talking about this slide, the audience in their heads should now have a question that your next slide is going to answer. And if you're writing that way, then your whole presentation is going to feel like one idea, one long idea, not 30 individual conversations. You know, someone speaks to a slide, they get to the end of the slide, then they're silent and they click, and then they say, so this slide is about. Or my favorite is everyone, so many speakers use the words "and so" as the first two words of every slide. And I've seen it coaching engineers like you talked about at that event. I had one who, the beginning of every single slide, they would start with, they'd look at the slide, which was behind them usually, and they'd be like, and so, as though every slide logically flowed from the slide before. And all I had to do was ask them that. What do you think are the first two words you say on every slide? And they're like, well, it's all different, or I don't know. And we would rewind the recording, or I would point it out to them the next time, and they'd see that every single time they started with those two words. So the trick for solving that problem, we're going a little deep on this one, we'll come back, don't worry, is before you start talking to the slide, load up the first two words you want to say, or the first 3 or 4 words you want to say, and get them in the buffer. The L2 cache, is one of my clients likes to say. Get them in the chamber before you speak, before you pull that trigger. Get those intentional words in there, because if you don't and you pull the trigger, and so is going to come out, or so is going to come out. That's another favorite. So is one of those insidious little words. We're going to talk about verbal fillers in a minute, but it makes you think that it's a meaningful word, because it means I just said something. This next thing is a logical conclusion to what I just said, but we don't usually use it that way. We use it as a filler. We use it as just tape to tie our two slides together, and we have to do better than that. So you have to, yeah, go ahead.
It's almost like a missed opportunity.
Yes.
When you talk about how do I actually transition from one idea to another, there's often just a missed opportunity to articulate, like you said, what is the question they're asking? How does this concept, whether it's a slide or just a point you're making, how does this point lead to that next point? And you can use good language there to say, well, that probably leads you to this question. Or, and now, of course, this means that this for this. Just don't take the easy way out. And so it just adds up over time. Don't take the easy way out. Think critically about how can I actually lead my audience to that next idea, instead of just, it's that piece of tape connecting two ideas together.
I'm reminded of maybe my favorite TED Talk I've ever seen was by Ben Zander. who talks about music and passion and creativity. And he talks about young piano students when they're learning Mozart, and they're playing on the piano and it's still hard for them. And you can watch their head bob up and down with the beat of the music, and it's bum, 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 ba-da-dum. And then 2 years later, after 2 more years of piano lessons, it's a little faster. It's bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-da-dum. I wish I had a piano, I would demonstrate for you. As they go on, the number of pulses, the number of beats decreases, and they're able to play more notes in one phrase. And a professional pianist, you won't see their head do that at all. You'll see that the entire piece by Mozart is one long idea that they're communicating. And the same is true in presentations. Speakers who every single slide is a pulse. And I said that idea, and now I'm going to click, and now I'm going to look at my slide, and then I'm going to say this idea. And then I'm going to click, look at my slide, and say this idea. And what you really want is your whole 25-minute presentation is one idea. And you've figured out what those connective tissues are, and you're communicating that in one long idea, like a piece of music. Okay, let's move on to verbal fillers. I'll set them up. Verbal fillers and equivocations we like to talk about. Verbal fillers are those simple little nothing words. Like, so, That's another one, and you probably have some of your own, but they're little words that don't mean anything. Equivocations are a little bit different. They're words and phrases that take the edge off of what you were saying. Kinda, sort of. Like can be one of these two. Right. They're ways of saying something and then taking some of it back, or shaving the sharp edge off of what you just said. And both of these two things get in the way of your communication. They get in the way of clarity, of confidence. They erode your message to your audience. Jeff, why do we do verbal fillers? Why do we use them when we communicate?
It's helpful for me to know why, only because it takes some of the edge off. Some of us get so hot and bothered about these things. And a lot of times they're small beer. It's not like it's the end of the world, but it's something worth considering. The reason we do these, A, is cultural. We hear it all the time around us. And so I got a 6-year-old who will sometimes say, like, where are you getting this from? Well, she's running around with other people who say it. So some of it is cultural. The other thing is, I think of it as a vestigial organ. It's a leftover thing that we do when we're presenting that is actually useful in one-on-one conversations. The reason we say ums and uhs, aside from it being cultural, is if, let's say I'm talking with Doug and we're having a good chat and I'm trying to come up with the next thing I'm going to say, I might go, because what I'm saying to Doug is I'm putting my hand up and going, I'm still trying to think of what I'm going to say next. Please, it's not your turn to talk. And so I'm talking along. Okay, gosh, we're going to talk about 3 things today. We're going to talk about comfortable, dynamic, and my brain runs to a file cabinet, tries to come up with it, comes back empathetic. It's useful there because it says, Doug, not your turn. In a presentation, more often than not, the audience isn't going to come and interrupt you. So you don't need those ums and uhs. I find it helpful to know why I do those things, why I have a tendency to do those things, but you can't end there. You can't just go, well, good, I have a realization of why I do those things. I guess I'll just keep doing them. No, we want to address those things. So Doug, what are some ways that we have trained people to address their verbal fillers?
Verbal fillers are funny in that they're really easy to clean up. People seem to be able to do that pretty quickly. But it's hard to keep clean. It's like your kitchen, right? Doing the dishes once doesn't take that long. You get the kitchen cleaned up, but it's a lot of work to keep your kitchen clean hour by hour, day by day, week by week, especially during a pandemic when we're all home all the time, verbal fillers are like that. We find that the best way to address verbal fillers is by pointing them out, drawing awareness to them. We've had buzzers where anytime someone says, we're going to buzz you. After 3 buzzes, they're hyper aware of what's coming out of their mouth and they don't want to get buzzed again. There are iPhone apps. I used this with a client once. I had an app, I think it was called Ummer or something like that. Ummo. And all I did was turn it on and set it on the table. And I said, okay, let's do a run through. And that thing's going to beep every time you say And after the 3rd one, he grabbed my phone like he was going to throw it across the room, It's frustrating and irritating, but it forces us to slow down and be conscious about what we're saying, which is the cure to verbal fillers. The problem is that there are a lot of things going on. We've gone through 5 areas of improving your public speaking today, and there are another 50 that you could be working on at any one time. Verbal fillers, where do they fall in that list of priority for you? So it takes discipline, it takes desire. You have to care about wanting to clean them up and making it a habit. But most of all, you need to be conscious when you're speaking. If you allow yourself to be conscious and practice that over and over again, you can learn to speak without adding verbal fillers to everything you're saying. And people argue with us sometimes that that's just natural. People that I want to sound more authentic. So saying like and that makes me sound more real, more authentic. And it really doesn't. It sounds a little sloppier. And if that's like wearing your hoodie and jeans to work and you want to be like that, that's fine. But if you have a message that matters, if you have something that has stakes to it that you care about moving your audience with, then don't you want to do everything you can to make that message land? And part of doing everything you can is cleaning up your language. It's low-hanging fruit. It's easy to do. It just takes some effort and some discipline. You got to care, and then you won't have trouble cleaning it up.
I told a group recently, to much offense, but who cares? That's what I got paid to do. I said, authenticity is more often than not an excuse. I just don't want to change. So I'm just going to be the authentic me. We want you to be you, but be the best version of you. These verbal fillers, there's 2 questions in the chat I want to talk about quickly. Julie mentioned, how do you help someone use a pause to replace those ums and uhs? It takes discipline. It takes awareness, like Doug is talking about. Listen to recordings. Find out when you are more not inclined to do that, and then start to think about, okay, how can I put a pause in there? I will warn you, it will feel awkward. It will feel awkward. Push through the awkwardness of that pause, and over time you'll get there. And that's connected to Beatrice's question. It's a great question about ums and uhs. And she basically says, what do you do when you're challenged in a meeting or a presentation? Hey, you're asked a challenging question. Well, immediately your brain is trying to go, okay, how do I find the words? I got to go up to that file cabinet to find what I'm going to say next. So I naturally go, okay, it's natural. We get it. But just like with any other thing, just work at it. Practice. Someone asks you a challenging question. So why do you think this isn't going to work in the next year? I really think the first thing, just put that pause in. Your brain, I'm gonna warn you, your brain's gonna panic and it's gonna be running around on fire. I can't believe we paused that long. They think we're a weirdo in it. But your audience won't read it that way. Think about the most confident people you know. I'm not talking about arrogant. I'm talking about confident people. When they're asked a challenging question, if they pause for a moment, just a moment to collect their thoughts, and it's quiet, and then they come back with a statement, aren't you like, well, that was a cool customer. They handled that really cool. Doug talks about being bulletproof a lot. That's part of being bulletproof, that you're asked a question and it doesn't, this is a terrible question. I can't get. It's that you go, okay, tough question, but I'm in control. I can be quiet for a second, and then I can come back with my answer. It's just all about training yourself. It's all about training yourself, moving from saying the to replacing it with that quick pause.
I'll add one note to that, Jeff, because I'm working with a client right now on Q&A specifically. And one, you got to practice Q&A. Write out a bunch of questions and give it to a friend or a coach and have them drill you.
The worst questions too.
The tough ones, yeah, not just the softballs. Have them drill you on it and practice your answer. Practice so you have some beats, so you know about what you want to say, and then you can respond intelligently. So questions won't be a surprise to you. The other thing that helps that we've been working on together is having some frameworks for answering questions. You shouldn't have to write a term paper from scratch every time someone asks you a question, because that is intimidating to and send yourself into panic mode because someone just asked you a tough question. You should have a framework. And I'll say one that we've been using is give the shortest answer first, then give the long answer, dive a little bit deeper, and then recap with the short answer again. So someone asks you a question about how the budget has been over this last quarter. You say, Well, I'll start by saying that it's not great, but we're in good shape for next quarter. Now, let me unpack that a little bit, and I'll speak for 5 minutes about the details of the budget. And then at the end, I'll say, so as I said at the beginning, not great at the moment, might not look that great, but we're in good shape for next quarter. And then you've answered it 3 times for one thing, but you also started out with a framework, an ABC model for yourself to fill in the blanks. And just having that puts your brain at rest a little bit. Just having a model to put your ideas into helps. And there are other models too, and you'll develop yours over time, but drilling with a partner or a coach really helps with that.
I love it. That's great. Yep.
Okay, so let's recap the 5 areas we've already talked about. There's some questions in the Q&A. If you haven't had a chance, please type into the Q&A box, and we'll start moving through those in a second. Today, Jeff and I talked about overcoming nervousness. We talked about what to do with your hands. We talked about using a dynamic voice, connecting the threads of your sentences so that they become longer ideas, and like avoiding sort of verbal fillers.
So you're all fixed. Everyone's fixed.
And a question that comes up for me after I hear about all these tips we just gave is, okay, that's a little overwhelming. What should I work on? What should I work on next? And I'd say that the first thing you need is you have to care about being better than you are now. What you said before, Jeff, about being authentic can be an excuse for staying the way you are. You have to care about being different, about improving, about changing. And once you care, then raise your awareness of what you are and are not doing well. Watch recordings, get a coach to help you. When you reach the end of that process, figuring out what you are and are not doing well, that's when you can start to work on it. You can seek out a book, a class, or a private coach who can help you with that.
And we've got some of that available. And if you want to avail yourself of that, you can. Duarte offers one-on-one speaker coaching in a virtual environment. That's great. But we also offer our Captivate virtual workshop. This is a class that Doug and I created and has evolved over time. And it's honestly, I think, it's hard to say this objectively, it's a pretty darn good class. We get great responses from people like you who show up and they take this class and they walk away feeling like they're faced in the right direction. And you get more insights into all of this stuff, but you also get coaching from the facilitators in breakout groups. You will walk away 6 to an even, you will walk away feeling more confident and ready for that next presentation you have to give. So our webinar has been brought to you by Duarte and the Captivate virtual workshop and by Ban Roll-On and your local Dr. Pepper bottler.
And the Wanland Company.
And the Wanland Company. Please invest. We have a tranche coming out, and I think it's very exciting. Let's head to the questions, Doug.
Yeah, let's head to the questions. All right. We had one around being authentic. I like this one. I want to speak to it. How do you bring your authentic self and still meet the audience's needs? This is a challenge for me because I'm overly cautious about avoiding offense. Thanks, Trina, for that question. A lot of this has to do with what you mean by authentic self. In all of the speakers we've worked with over the years, hundreds, there's authentic, and then there's authentic but better speaker authentic. And everyone can take their authentic self and improve their speaking ability and improve their awareness of what the audience needs. So I've never been stopped by someone who says that makes me feel not authentic. Then, okay, then don't do that thing. Let's find another thing that makes sense for you. That authentic isn't a point in time, but it's a journey and it's a path. And we just need to find the things that bring out your authentic self as a speaker.
I'll say this on authenticity. I bring this up whenever I can. In high school and college, I was the shyest, most socially awkward guy you ever met. My authentic self was Wallflower. And I started getting jobs where I had to do public speaking and I had to change. Does that mean Jeff isn't Jeff anymore? No, he's still Jeff. I'm just a more dynamic, hopefully, I mean, you can debate that, but hopefully a more dynamic and interesting speaker than I was naturally. I can change that, but I'm still me. I'm still going to bring certain elements that Doug won't or someone else won't. And Doug's going to bring elements that I won't and someone else won't. You can still be authentically you. You just want to be a more engaging version of that you. We got a lot of questions,
We
Doug.
do, yeah. Let's talk about that one we alluded to earlier about reading from a script on your screen. You want to speak to that one, Jeff?
Yeah, don't do it if you can. Now, sometimes you gotta read the words word for word because legal has signed off and Jerry in accounting has said that this is the way it's got to be. And I get it. Sometimes you have to, but just trust us when you're reading from a script and you're saying every word that's on the page, your audience isn't connecting with you because they're thinking you're not here. Why should I be here? So my encouragement is you go ahead, you have a blast. This is your railroad. Run it how you want, but you write all that out and then boil it down into key phrases, key ideas, and communicate from those. It takes discipline, because a lot of times you might have 7 minutes but if you're hitting these things, you might start to wander off into infinity talking about something too long and you've eaten up all your time. It's going to require discipline, but best you can get away from just reading the script. And maybe inherent in this is also, where do you actually place things? That's a big question we get. And so I would encourage you, place your notes wherever your notes are, whatever you're going to look at the most, right below the camera, as close to below the camera as you can. We always say that spot on your screen right below the camera, look at that, right below the camera is the most valuable real estate on your screen. Because when you put your notes there and you're reading your notes, I'm looking at some notes I used today. Right here, it looks like I'm looking at the screen. When I put my notes over here, okay, well, today we're going to talk about how your WAN interacts with your LAN. It takes your audience away from you. You want to be looking into the camera as much as possible.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Jeff. Karen asks, I work with an executive who tends to talk down to audiences, and it's noted by colleagues who miss his message because they're distracted by his tone. What advice do you have to avoid this?
Well, I would say what you do is when a coworker leaves their computer, you get on their computer and you send an email from their computer to the boss and tell them what a terrible communicator they are. Someone's got to confront this person. And so you have to figure out a way to do it in a good way and let them know, hey, throw your team under the bus and go, I'm just hearing from a lot of people that I know you don't want to be arrogant. I know you don't want to sound like this. Appeal to their good nature. They're better angels and go, I know you don't want to come across this way. We're getting some sense that is the way you're coming across. And I think there's some way we can change how you communicate, how you answer questions, what you say, that's going to make it seem less like that. But if no one's going to confront this person, ain't nothing going to change.
It's funny, as speaker coaches, sometimes we're hired to put our head in the lion's mouth, that the person who hired us will meet us there at the edge of the stage and sorry, before you go on there, we need you to tell him he's being arrogant. And I'm like, all right, thanks. We'll do that, but there are generally a couple of levels that we're usually working with speakers on. One is behaviors, verbal fillers. What do you do with your hands? And another one is the inner stuff, and sometimes you need to have a kind of an Oprah moment with someone and say, look, I don't know if you've ever heard this before from anyone else, but you're coming off as a little arrogant. Do you have any sense of that? Has anyone ever told you that? Let's talk about it. How do you think about your audience during these conversations? And is that working out? Are you getting what you want by the end of the presentation? Because that's the point of all of this, by the way. A presentation is a conversation between you and the audience, and they have all the power. At the end of the presentation, they're either going to believe you, not believe you, act on what you say, not act on what you say. They have all the power to do that or not do that. So you can't do the presentation without them. And if you're not getting the results that you wanted from your presentation, it's either your content or your delivery. And if you're showing up arrogant like that, that's probably a problem, and it's showing itself in other ways. So hire a coach and have them do it. That's one way. Another way that I've seen work is through surveys. Start doing surveys after every talk they give and leave opportunities for comments. Give categories for the audience to rank them on and let them see their numbers. They might think that they're going to get perfect 5s across the board and only good comments. And then they're going to see a lot of 2s and 3s and some comments that say the word arrogant. And that can often be enlightening and soften them up a little bit for change.
Give them the benefit of the doubt. They may just not know. They may just not know. And if you politely, kindly, empathetically let them know, we have found more often than not, people go, oh, well, I had no idea. Okay, great. Well, we can work on it. Now, if they're going to buck up and be jerks about it, well, there you go. That's how it goes.
Jeff, how do you compensate for energy when you're not in person? You know, you're a dynamic, energetic speaker when you're in person, when you need to be, with lots of contrast, so you're very dynamic. And you also manage to pull that off when you're speaking remotely. How do you manage that transition though? Because it's a very different experience. You're in your house staring at a pane of glass right now, as opposed to being in a room staring at a lot of faces. So how do you manage that transition? This is also from anonymous attendee.
Oh, sure. Miss attendee. We're often asked, what's the difference between presenting in person and presenting virtually? And I have discovered that my go-to answer is nothing. Nothing is different except for the importance of doing all the things we're talking about. Is it important to be dynamic in person? Yes. It's doubly important in a virtual environment because people are more distracted, less likely to pay attention, more inclined to check out. So I want to be dynamic in an in-person environment. I know I have to be even more dynamic in that virtual environment. And I think that goes for everybody. I always think in person, people have, let's say it's about this much attention span. In a virtual environment, we know this is true. The attention span is down around here. That means all of those dynamic tools we teach are even more valuable and more important to get people to keep paying attention. So it's harder for me. I'm more exhausted after giving a presentation virtually than I am in person. I'm much more exhausted because I'm trying to be on, trying to make things pop, trying to get a little quieter sometimes, trying to do everything, even more so than when I do it in person. Because in person, people are just a little bit more prone to pay attention.
This next question is from Paulina, and she asks, what advice can you give to English non-native speakers to overcome their nervousness while delivering presentations? And I'll give my answer first, Jeff, and then you can add if you like. But what I find myself telling non-native English speakers more than anything is that you're doing great. You're probably doing much better than you think. And you're probably defeating yourself with your own self-doubt. But as long as the audience can understand you and you're communicating the things that you want to be communicating, you're doing fine. And the machinations that are going on in your brain to help get those words out, you're probably doing a lot better than you think, and you need to trust yourself a little bit more. Get feedback from some people. If you're not doing well enough, they'll tell you. They'll let you know that we can't understand you. Your speech is a little too stilted, so we need you to improve that. Then the answer is practice, of course. But the vast majority of folks that we've talked to, if they were invited to speak somewhere or a boss asked them to stand up and give a presentation, they knew that you'd be able to do that, and you're probably doing fine. I don't know. Do you have any different experiences, Jeff?
Nope. I'm going to just double down on that. I think I can think of two situations where I was with a team and one person was going, I just know my English isn't all that great. And I went, hang on. And I looked at the team. I said, is Penelope's English great? And they all went, yes. And I've had that happen more than once. So I'm with Doug. Don't overthink it. Don't think you're worse than you actually are. It will just cause a cycle and it will pull you down. More than likely, like Doug said, your English is strong. People can understand what you're saying. So build on that and go with it. Don't give in to defeatist thinking about your English. I'm a native Esperanto speaker. The English is my second language. I think I'm nailing it. Esperanto. Is anybody speaking Esperanto anymore? Is there some corner of the world where
I gave it up years ago?
Oh, well, you have to. Either the verb choices aren't as
We've
wide.
gotten a number of questions from about the name of the app that we mentioned. I honestly don't know if it's still around. I haven't used it in ages, but it was called Ummo, UMMO. If you search for that on your app store, you'll find out whether it exists or not. But I'll also tell you that Microsoft PowerPoint now has a built-in feature that you can turn it on to record and listen while you're practicing, and it'll do things like count the ums for you. So I just said one. That's a tool that you can use. We're in our last minute or so, and a couple of the questions have gone back to that idea of nervousness and what can you do about it. And I wonder if, Jeff, you and I each add one tip for handling nervousness before you go out on stage, before you get in front of a camera. Tip from you?
My tip is, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier, I'm always about lowering the stakes. Lower the stakes. I will never be able to fully lower the stakes. Every meeting, every presentation means something. But I want you to picture almost like a water balloon that has some water and some air in it. We want to get rid of the air. That's not part of the water balloon. We want to get rid of anything else. That's a dumb analogy, but there you go. That's all I got today. So lower the stakes as much as possible. There's regular stakes, and then there's the inflated stakes. And a lot what we teach in Captivate is, and I won't go into all of it, but if you can truly get in touch with who you are and have a stable line to the person you are, what's most important to you, the things that are immutable, the things that are unchangeable, no matter how this presentation goes, if you can think on those things, the stakes will lower. I think we all, well, if the boss doesn't like me, this, and this will happen. Okay. All right. But don't go too far on that. Lower the stakes some, and you will sense some of that nervousness coming down. Doug, how would you add to that?
That's great. I'll answer quickly. We have an article on this somewhere, so we'll find it and send it out with the recap. But pre-game rituals. Speakers have rituals that they use prior to a talk. And we found that some people need to get their energy up before a talk. You can do things. I had a client who did push-ups backstage to get his energy revved up before he went out. Some people need to get their energy to come down before a talk, and they can use other things. So some might use a power song, some might use a 5-minute meditation. The trick is to find out what works. So every time you speak, you should be trying something new and seeing how that worked for you to bring your nerves down, to change your state before you got out there and in front of an audience. Figure out what works for you, and we'll look for that article and include it in the recap.
Also, one little add-on: present as much as you can. The more you do it, the more the nerves will come down. I must have done public speaking 15,000 hours in my life. Again, the more you do it, the more it will come down over time. It just starts to take away some of the uniqueness and the nervousness of it. And just present as often as you want. Present as often as you can. That's the only way.
Absolutely. And I see Alexa already dropped that blog post into the chat. So if you're still on, you can grab it from there. Thank you, Alexa. Alexa and Emily, you're both awesome. Thank you for joining us. We're a couple minutes over and we still have most of the crowd here. We really appreciate you taking some time with us. I want to just call out again that we have Captivate workshops that are really helpful in learning all of the methodology we spoke about today and more, and getting some coaching in a breakout session from a coach. We also offer—
Wait, there's a Captivate on July 21st and 22nd. It's broken up into 2 days.
July 21st and 22nd, a Captivate workshop that you can attend. So if you'd like to check it out, we'll be sending information out about that as well. Thank you for your time today. Jeff and I always have a ball when we do these, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks to Emily and Alexa for producing. Have a great day.